people who said I'd lost my touch and was only doing pansy simple games. I thought, get your heads around this. I do actually do quite a few.
Designed on spite.
I've done that so many times you wouldn't believe it.
Nice.
Yeah, I've designed games just to annoy people.
Elaine, guess what game we are reviewing today?
There Will Be Blood?
Yes. Actually, today we are not reviewing a board game, we are reviewing a legend. Originally published in 2007 and known only as Brass, this not so very pretty game with a not so very pretty theme of establishing factories in the bright and cheerful setting of Industrial Revolution England has outlived many board games that are now forgotten. And despite the addition of the subtitle Lancashire, somehow in this new edition, it is way more beautiful than it has ever been.
Reviewing a game that came out more than a decade ago and has survived the hostile environment of the number of board games more than doubling is pointless, because if you came here to see if we thought this game was good, then the answer is obvious. Of course it's good. But just because it's good, it doesn't mean that you should go out and buy it, because it's entirely possible that a complex game about digging canals and building factories up north might not be for you.
Hold on to your boats, because we are getting ahead of ourselves. In Brass Lancashire, you will take on the roles of one of 6 old grumpy men or 2 grumpy ladies who dream of becoming titans of industry. You will receive a cardboard slab that is littered with tiles that represent 5 different industries. You could focus on building cotton mills, which has the best cost to points ratio, but it will only score you points if you flip them, and you will need ports to do so. Building these industries and the links that interconnect them requires resources, so you might want to build iron and coal mines, and you will quickly learn that you want to diversify yourself, because all of these abstract looking tiles are interlinked, but the more you focus into one of them, the more reward you will get. So you will want to build all of them, and then you'll say, Dad, can I build more tiles, please? And Dad, represented by the brutal and unrelenting design of this game, will say, shut up and go to your room. On the surface, Brass is very much like a ham and cheese sandwich. It's simple, straightforward, and abstracted to its most basic, healthy ingredients. Like in most Euro games, you will build buildings that will in turn produce you resources like coal, iron, and money, and then you'll turn those resources to build more buildings that will score you points. Hilariously, you'll place these industries on the most conceivably mundane British locales, such as Burnley or Manchester, Preston.
They're not in Britain.
What do you mean they're not in Britain? I'm sure I've heard of these.
That's because they're from Harry Potter.
Oh.
So that's the surface level stuff done. The next bit is a little tricky. Brass is a game that isn't complicated but is complex, except that it is also complicated. The rules fit into this wafer-thin manual that's padded out with illustrations, examples and strategy tips, but it's not the amount of rules that makes it complicated, but their intersection. I know this doesn't mean a lot yet, but bear with us. To illustrate how frustrating Brass can be to grok, we've installed this complexity encouragement device. In the next scene, Efka, who has a penchant for relaying an experience rather than the rules, will explain how to build a factory. Each time he omits a detail, a subtle interaction, or just plain gets it wrong, I will employ the device. Ready?
No!
Go!
Let's say you want to build a factory. That's pretty simple. You'll start each game with a hand of cards depicting either locations you can build or types of factories you can build. Spend a card and you'll be able to build in that location or that type of factory. If you decide to spend, say, an iron mine card, for example, technically you could build in any space on the board that allows for an iron mine to exist, except you are restricted to only building in locations within your network, meaning they have to be built in locations where you already have a factory or have your canal boats or railroads linking to a location where you already have a factory. Whereas if you spend a location card, you can build anywhere. Whereas if you spend a location card, you have to worry about resource costs. If your factory requires iron to be built, it must be consumed either from a player's factory or the supply, which incurs an additional cost. If your factory requires coal, however, because historically coal was needed in huge quantities, wherever you're building has to be connected to a source of coal. which is kind of like being in your network, which is nothing like being in your network. Because being connected means that it doesn't matter whether it's your boat or someone else's boat. You just have to draw a line towards whatever you're building to a source of coal via boats or railroads. And that's the rules for building factories. And in the first half of the game, you can only build one building per location. And that's the rules to building factories.
You know they're called industries, not factories, right?
Oh, come on.
Each turn in Brass is an exercise in frustration because everything is so interlinked that you'll find yourself thinking you can do something only to realise you forgot this or that or the other, so why even bother? Your greatest plan, your genius move that you've been building up to for turns will be scuppered by someone interrupting you with, "Actually, I'm not sure you can do that." Sometimes even building just a single tile will feel like climbing the tallest peaks of Mount Everest. Each action you take requires you to play a card and then draw a card. Turn after turn, this deck gets smaller and you have yourself a pressure cooker situation going. Brass is a game that thrives on stress. For some of you, and I don't blame you, this will be the line in the sand that you just won't see the point in crossing. It's easy to dismiss Brass as just dry mechanisms inked to link together, forcing you to think about cubes and cardboard chits grinding like old gears until they forcibly click into points. And to some extent this game is that. But stay a little while longer and listen, because you might discover that those cogs spin into something beautiful.
Inside the dusty heart of Brass is emergent play, meaning every reaction feeds into a potential response. Let's say you want to build an iron mine. It comes into play with iron cubes. Every time someone needs iron, they use your iron, which is a good thing because as soon as all the iron clears from the tile, it will flip and score you points. Not only is it thematic, each business using resources other businesses create to fuel their own goals, it creates incentives and opportunities for future actions. Similarly, if you develop, meaning discarding lower level tiles from your board to give you access to higher level industries, you have to pay 1 iron for each tile you discard. What happens in a situation when there is no iron either on your opponent's factories or your own factories? Well, that's not really a problem. You can still use iron from the general market, paying money for each cube you discard from there, which could potentially lead to the situation when no iron is on the general market. That's alright, you can still buy it, it's just very expensive. But what if you were to build an iron mine when the iron market is depleted? Well, that's good news, because all the iron that would potentially go on that tile instead goes onto the general market. Not only maybe automatically flipping that tile for points, but also giving you money for each cube you put on there. What does this all mean? Well, developing consumes iron, therefore decreasing the supply and increasing the demand and increasing the price of iron, which incentivizes to do things that actually produce iron, like building an iron mine, which then floods the market with iron, and suddenly the price for iron goes down because the supply is plentiful and the price has decreased, which means iron is cheap, which incentivizes you to then do actions that actually consume iron, such as developing. So therefore the game becomes self-fulfilling. It's like somebody knocking down the first domino and then the dominoes keep falling in a circle infinitesimally or until the game ends. It's like an Ouroboros of resource exploitation. It's like somebody starting the car and going,
how long can we drive this for? And it turns out forever, because driving the car makes the fuel.
But what about the low-cost underpaid labour force?
In the car?
Yeah, in the car, like the tiny people that are making the fuel in the engine.
Oh no, don't worry about them. They're abstracted away.
despite logic, just like the mechanisms in the game infinitely rotating, I bet I could go on about the clever interlocking mechanisms in Brass forever, because they just don't seem to end, and I could just sit here and list them over and over and over again, but that would just be way too self-indulgent, just kind of proving my own intellectual capacity of understanding this game. So for the sake of brevity, we're just not going to do that. Cotton mills are the tiles that will score you a lot of points, but to flip them you have to be connected to a port. You can of course build your own port, that's fine, but as soon as you do, someone will sense an opportunity, build their own cotton mill, and then flip your port and their cotton mill, effectively flipping you the finger. And you'll go, okay, no, I'm smart, I'm gonna wait for someone else to build a port, and then I'll need to build like a road connecting to that port to my cotton mill, and then I'll flip my cotton mill, and that will be fine. Except you then realize that in this game, cotton mills are some of the most expensive tiles, and each time you spend money, it goes on the initiative track. Spend the most, and next turn, you will be lost, giving people ample opportunity to once again flip you the finger. I promise I am done now. And actually, I have to admit that I have avoided playing Brass for the longest time. Having a game held up in particular reverie can be mildly off-putting, especially when that reverie is, this game is for smart people, which makes me think I'll be spending my evening with unwitting victims of the Dunning-Kruger effect who will try to prove their intellectual superiority by learning rote strategies. But having played Brass, I realized there isn't really very much that is rote about it. It's a rhizomatic organism that blooms each time you sit down and play, and its growth depends on you. You don't need to be smart, you need to sense opportunities, you need to zig when they zag, and maybe you need to be a little bit clever, and then you can be good at Brass.
You ironically clevered this scene up, didn't you?
Yes.
That's not to say that Brass is somehow easy and forgiving. Catch a wave and you'll gracefully coast to the shore of victory points, but slip up and you'll faceplant onto the board. That's the surfboard, not the game board, although I suppose the analogy works for both. In a game where you're constantly trying to find opportunities to exploit your opponents, it's very easy to find that you're the one who's always being exploited. All of that is to say that Brass isn't a very nice experience when you know that you're losing. We already mentioned the brief rule set that on the surface seems like it's easy to learn, but it's not that the minutiae of the rules is hard to understand. In fact, I'd argue that Brass is a relatively simple game, it's just that the minutiae constantly gets in the way of actual play. I often found myself asking my friends whether they remember to check if they're connected or if they've spent a card as part of doing an action, as if I was checking up on them, as if I thought they didn't know how to play. But of course they know how to play, it's just that if one of us didn't do that, someone would forget and make a mistake, which made me feel like I was an immigration officer on an episode of Border Patrol, checking for spelling errors on someone's visa document.
And what about the game literally having to be played twice? What other game does that? Halfway through the game, the canal phase will be over, which is when the game, like an angry mother who found out you haven't done your homework, barges into the bathroom and takes all your toy boats away. All the links you have been carefully building between your factories will disappear as the industry discovers that digging all these ditches was so yesterday. In the second railroad phase, you'll end up playing the game sort of again, but this time the level 2 factories and higher still remain on the board, but everything else is taken away and you have to reconnect everything again, and this time it is so much harder and more punishing. And what really fascinates me is that even in the first phase, every decision that you make, even if it seems to be the best possible decision at the time, is tinged with this aura of uncertainty because you're just not sure how it's going to play out when everything is upended. I find that beautiful. So that's Brass in as much of a nutshell as you could actually fit a Ticket to Ride sized board game, about 7 times more game than Ticket to Ride, into an actual nutshell. It doesn't fit.
To some, this video might seem like a truncation, and if it does, then you probably already love Brass Lancashire, or might be someone that would. Or if it all feels like a bit too much and you weren't intrigued, then you won't. Or it might have just sparked enough curiosity to finally play this game that you've heard about mentioned in dark, seedy cardboard alleys from strange men who pull board games out from under their trench coats. And if you're not one of those people, you might not have heard that the new edition comes with a companion Brass Birmingham. And if you're just intrigued enough to get one of them, then you'll have to wait a bit longer. By now you can tell these games are a bit complex and each of them deserves a good amount of time spent on them. Our review of Brass Birmingham will come in the future, but for now I will leave you with a special message from Efka.
Have you ever wondered why is it that, every YouTube video ends with, if you like this video, like and subscribe it, and my hands and fingers turning every which way and pointing into nothing really? Isn't it banal? Isn't it trite? Aren't YouTubers self-aware? Do they just not get how cliche the whole thing is? And I'll tell you why we do it. We do it because it works, and not only because it works, but it's because it's beneficial not just to us, but to you as well. Because YouTube is run by machine algorithms, every time you click a like or a dislike or a comment or subscribe, every time you engage with the video in some form, doesn't matter what it is, you're helping us grow because you're telling the algorithms that people are engaging with this thing, and the algorithms are pushing the thing upwards. And right now, actually, we really need that because YouTube algorithms want to push everything down rather than up. It's really actually hard to go up. So we need you to press a thing, just press anything. It doesn't even matter. Just press it. And the reason that's beneficial to you is because the more engagement we get, the more it feeds back into itself, and the more viewership we get, and the more viewership we get, the more potential revenue we get, and the more potential revenue we get, the more we can dedicate our time and resources and finances to making better videos. Have you noticed how MPI videos have been just going woo in quality? Well, that's because of you, right? You made that happen, not us. That's you. You engaging in the comments and saying something nice, or just liking, or whatever, even disliking. So, if you never left a comment or liked the video or whatever, maybe do so, just because, you know what, this will be better. And also, you never know, you might even find a friend, because the people who comment on our MPI videos, they're really nice. Even if you haven't got anything to say about this video, if you just have questions about board games, maybe leave them down there, and maybe someone else will answer them, and you might make a friend, which I think would be just the nicest outcome that I could imagine out of this. So there, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe and leave a comment, okay? See you later.